All right, so you've got an accounting exam on the horizon, and you know the statement of cash flows is going to be a huge part of it. I know it can seem a little tricky, but it tells this amazing story that profit on its own just can't. Well, in this explainer, we're going to crack that code slide by slide, so you can walk into that exam feeling totally confident. Let's get into it. Okay, let's kick things off with a little puzzle. Imagine a company's balance sheet shows its cash balance jumped from $70,000 to $150,000. That's an $80,000 increase, right? Now, your first gut reaction might be to peek at the income statement and think, oh, they must have made an $80,000 profit. But it's almost never that simple. So why can't we just look at net income to get the answer? And here it is. This is probably the single most important concept we're going to cover. If you get this, everything else will fall into place. Say it with me. Profit is not the same as cash. An income statement tells you if a company is making a profit, sure, but it doesn't tell you if it has the actual physical cash to pay its rent, its employees, or invest in its own growth. That, my friends, is a completely different story. So, to tell that story, here's our game plan. First, we're going to really solidify why profit isn't cash. Then, we'll break down the 3 essential types of cash flow you absolutely have to know. We'll do a real deep dive into operating activities, and yeah, this is where that all-important indirect method comes into play. After that, we'll knock out investing and financing, and finally, we'll put all the pieces together. All right, first up, let's really hammer home this fundamental concept. I promise you, once this difference truly clicks, the entire statement of cash flows just makes sense. So here's the bottom line. The income statement is awesome for measuring profitability over time. But here's the catch. It includes a bunch of non-cash stuff, like depreciation, and it includes revenue that you've earned but haven't actually collected the cash for yet. The statement of cash flows, on the other hand, is like the ultimate reality check. It only cares about one thing: cash that actually came in the door and cash that actually went out. It tells you if the company can actually generate the green stuff to survive and grow. So if the income statement isn't the whole story, how do we track the actual cash? Well, we do it by breaking the story down into 3 main chapters, or sections. And this structure is what makes the statement so incredibly powerful and honestly pretty easy to analyze once you know what to look for. And these are the big 3: operating, investing, and financing. The best way to think about them is like 3 buckets. Every single cash transaction a company makes has to fit into one of these 3 buckets. And here's the cool part. When we add up what's in these buckets at the end, the total is going to perfectly explain that $80,000 jump in cash we started with. This is how we solve the puzzle. Now pay close attention here, because this slide is basically your cheat sheet for the exam. It lays it all out. Operating activities are the day-to-day stuff, the cash from your main business. Investing is all about buying or selling the big-ticket items, your long-term assets like buildings and equipment. And financing, that's all about how you get your money, either by borrowing it from lenders or getting it from owners. All right, let's jump into our first deep dive. And honestly, this is the big one: cash flows from operating activities. You can think of this as the engine room of the entire company. So the textbook definition talks about principal revenue-producing activities. But what does that actually mean in plain English? It's asking one simple question: is the company's main business model, the reason it exists, actually generating cash? You really want to see a nice, strong, positive number here. Okay, this slide is absolutely crucial. This is the indirect method in action. I guarantee you're going to see this on your test. Notice how we don't start from scratch. We grab the net income number right from the top of the income statement. Then we start making adjustments to get it back to a cash number. For instance, see that line for depreciation? We add it back. Why? Well, depreciation was an expense that lowered our net income, but did any cash actually leave the company for it? Nope. So to get to the real cash flow, we have to add it back in. We do the same thing for changes in things like accounts receivable and inventory. So after all those tweaks and adjustments, look at this. The company started with a net income of around $7.2 billion, but it actually generated a whopping $27.8 billion in cash from its operations. That's an enormous difference, and it paints a picture of a really healthy core business. That is the number that matters: net cash provided by operating activities. Okay, so the company's main business is a cash printing machine. Awesome. But what did they do with all that cash? This is where we look at the investing and financing sections to see the story of their bigger strategy. So looking at the investing section, you can tell this company is thinking big. And remember, any number you see in parentheses, that means cash is flying out the door. They spent over $10 billion on new equipment and a massive $14.6 billion buying up other companies. Now, that's not a bad thing at all. It just shows they are seriously investing in future growth. All told, they used a net $24 billion for investing. So where did they get some of the cash for those huge investments? Let's check out the financing section. And here, you see this kind of push and pull. They brought in almost $16 billion in fresh cash by taking on new debt. But at the same time, they used a lot of cash to keep their owners happy, paying out over $6 billion in dividends and spending another $7.4 billion to buy back their own stock. So the net result here was about $2.5 billion in cash used for financing. All right, we've looked at all three parts of the story. The core business made a ton of cash. They used a huge chunk of it to invest in growth, and they also gave some back to their owners. Now it's time for the grand finale. Let's put it all together and finally solve that puzzle from the beginning. And here it is, the big aha moment. This is how it all ties together. You take that positive cash from operations, that $27.8 billion. You subtract the cash they used in investing, that $24 billion. And you subtract the cash they used in financing, the $2.5 billion. And what's the result? A net increase in cash of about $1.2 billion for the year. See? It adds up perfectly. Every single dollar has a home. So, look, the main takeaway here is that this isn't just some boring accounting thing you have to memorize for an exam. This is a superpower. This is how real-world analysts and investors look past the headlines about profit and understand the true story of a company's health, its strategies, and where it's headed in the future. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on. We've seen the numbers, right? Really strong cash from the main business, massive investments in buying other companies and new equipment, all while taking on some new debt and rewarding shareholders. What's the story here? What is this company telling you and the rest of the world about its future? Thinking like that, that's what takes you from just getting the answer right to really understanding what the numbers mean.